Welcome to a space where true love doesn't wear makeup and real connection doesn't check the clock. This is where deep love lives, in the trembling of skin that remembers, in the eyes that see past age, in the silence between kisses that ask permission without words. Here, we tell the stories that aren't rushed, aren't rehearsed, and never fake. Stories of stormy nights that awaken forgotten hearts, of hands that don't just touch, but understand, of bodies that remember what it means to be wanted, not for the night, but for the soul. If you've ever loved deeply, quietly, unexpectedly, you're in the right place, because here we don't just tell love stories. We live them again, moment by moment, breath by breath. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stay close. Because the kind of love we share here doesn't fade when the storm ends. The wind had been howling for hours, not in anger, but in that quiet way storms sometimes speak, like a whisper that grows teeth. The kind of night that makes walls creak and windows cry. The fireplace flickered, half lit, barely warming the room, and in the middle of that storm, the kind that crawls beneath the skin, the knock came. It wasn't loud, just enough to interrupt the stillness inside. Long before the knock, stillness had taken over everything. Not peace, not silence, just a kind of numb quiet that settles in when touch becomes memory and not something felt. That kind of quiet doesn't scream, it sinks, lowly, over the years, until even loneliness forgets your name. But the knock, that soft, uncertain knock, like someone asking the house for permission to exist. It came again, and something in the body stirred, not fear, not even surprise, just something different than the usual repetition of days and the echoing of absence. He was standing there, soaked from the storm. Hair wet and sticking to his forehead, eyes unsure but open, like they were searching for safety but offering it too. He wasn't expected, not by the house, not by the heart, and certainly not by the body that had spent years forgetting what it meant to respond to anything but cold sheets. He smiled that half smile, the one people wear when they aren't sure if they'll be welcomed or sent back into the rain. He didn't say anything right away, just stood there, as if something in the doorway held him still. Then came the words, soft and simple. I didn't know where else to go. Maybe it was the storm, maybe it was the eyes, maybe it was the way the loneliness inside was tired of pretending it was enough. The door opened wider, and with it, something else opened too. Something invisible, something locked behind years of closing in. He stepped in, dripping water onto the hardwood, and suddenly, the room wasn't so quiet anymore. His presence filled it, not loudly, not intrusively, but like warmth slipping under a closed door, gradually reaching places forgotten. The towel handed to him was just a gesture, but the hands that gave it trembled slightly. Not from the cold, but from the sudden nearness of something real. He dried his hair slowly, then looked up with a grateful nod. No words, just eyes that lingered, as if they knew there was more going on than just shelter from a storm. The couch became a shared space, not side by side, not at first, but near enough. The fire gave off a soft glow, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the silence between two people wasn't empty. It was full of something waiting to happen, without demand or expectation. Stories came out slowly, pieces of lives shared not out of habit, but out of real interest. There was no performance, no masks, just the soft unwrapping of hearts that had been quiet for too long. He laughed at something small, not loud, just honest, and that laugh reached something deep inside, something that had gone quiet not from pain, but from never being heard. He listened differently, not just with his ears, but with his face, his stillness, his eyes, and in that listening, something cracked open, like the first break in the clouds, the kind that lets moonlight fall through when you thought the night would stay forever. He touched her hand, not accidentally, not urgently, just, intentionally, as if asking a question through his fingertips, a question that didn't need an answer, only presence, and the skin remembered. It remembered warmth, it remembered closeness, It remembered what it felt like to be touched without being taken from. No one moved too fast. The storm outside raged, but inside, everything slowed. The hand that rested on the knee wasn't demanding. It was anchoring, calming, and the breath that followed wasn't shallow anymore. It was full, like the body had waited years just to exhale properly. When the heads leaned in, it wasn't for escape. It was for connection. When the lips met, it wasn't to forget the world. It was to finally feel it, fully, quietly, completely. No fireworks, just depth, just truth, just a soft collision of want and wonder. The hours passed without checking. Time melted. What happened next didn't need narration. It didn't need drama. It was slow, real, kind, a rediscovery, a remembering of what it meant to be wanted. Not just for a night, but for the person inside the quiet. Inside the years, inside the forgotten parts, and when it was over, nothing was gone. Everything had arrived. The storm had passed, but something stronger had entered. Something honest. Something that didn't knock just once, but kept knocking until a door deeper than the front one opened wide. And in that quiet afterward, with the fire low and bodies close, the silence returned. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was full. The door hadn't even shut behind him yet when it happened. He looked, not glanced. Not scanned, but truly looked. As if the storm outside had forced open more than the sky, it had pulled something raw into the room, something stripped of small talk and shallow things. His eyes were wet from rain, lashes heavy, breaths still uneven from the run to the door. But it was the stillness in them, the unwavering way he looked straight through the years and into something deeper, that made everything inside shift. There was no pretending in that gaze. No performing, just recognition, the kind that doesn't see wrinkles or seasons past, but something beneath the skin, something that had been tucked away so long it almost flinched when finally touched. But it didn't flinch. It held. He didn't say a word, not right then, and maybe that's what made it more real. Words would have cheapened it. His presence alone spoke loud enough. Like his body had carried a message the soul had been waiting to hear for far too long. And something inside answered. He stepped out of the rain and into the space, dripping with more than water, soaked in whatever had brought him to the door, maybe curiosity, maybe loneliness, maybe fate. But once he was in the room, once he stood there blinking water from his lashes and meeting a gaze that hadn't been met like that in years, age stopped mattering. Completely. Age didn't exist in that moment. Not his, not hers, just that living, breathing now, that shared inhale before words ever try to name what's happening between two people, that slow, burning electricity that creeps up the spine when nearness becomes impossible to ignore. He peeled off his wet jacket, and the way he did it, slow, unhurried, made it feel like a ritual, not for show, not for seduction, but a soft disarming, like he knew the room needed stillness more than charm. His shirt clung to his chest, the damp fabric transparent in the firelight, but it wasn't the body that drew the gaze. It was what pulsed just beneath it, the tenderness, the readiness, the hunger that wasn't desperate but deep. He sat near the fire without asking, the way someone sits when they sense it's okay to belong. Conversation found them slowly, bits and pieces of stories, laughs that echoed more in the eyes than the voice. And the whole time, even in the talking, the looking didn't stop. The eyes didn't drift like most people's do. They stayed, as if reading more than what was being said, as if trying to memorize more than a face. He leaned in when he listened, not out of habit, but out of need, as though hearing wasn't enough. He wanted to feel each word, and in that closeness, something started to ache, a good ache, a full ache. The kind that comes when you realize your body has been waiting for years without saying a word, waiting to be seen like this, felt like this, not touched, just felt, and when the touch did come, it was barely that. Just fingers brushing the side of an arm, like a whisper, but the reaction was immediate. The skin warmed, the breath caught, every nerve remembered, because the truth is, age becomes irrelevant when someone looks at you like that. The air was thick with more than storm. There was static, real static, not from lightning, but from every inch of space between the two bodies that suddenly felt unbearable. Every time he shifted closer, the pulse quickened, not from fear, but from longing that hadn't dared speak before. And when their hands found each other again, it was no accident. His fingers were warm now, dry, soft, but firm. He didn't rush, he didn't lead, he invited. And when their fingers laced together, it felt less like touching and more like remembering. As if the hands had known each other in another time. As if they were made to fit like that, across years, across doubts. He leaned in, closer this time. There was no question in his eyes, but there was respect. A pause, an unspoken permission. The kiss didn't come fast. It came when the air between them became too heavy to bear, when the ache in the chest grew louder than the thunder, when the breath between lips felt like it could catch fire. And when it came, it was slow, searing, tender. It didn't demand. It discovered. He kissed like someone who wasn't just tasting lips, but listening to every heartbeat beneath them. He kissed like he had all the time in the world and was grateful for every second of it. Everything softened in that kiss. Every year shed its weight. Every scar grew quiet. There was no thought, just feel, just warmth, just the sudden awareness that this wasn't something that could be explained to anyone, not friends, not the mirror, not even memory. Because it wasn't about explanation. It was about presence. It was about finally being seen, not as someone who had lived a long life, but as someone still living. When their foreheads rested together after, he smiled again. And the smile didn't say thank you or I want more or I'm falling. It just said I'm here, and that somehow meant everything, because being looked at like that, being seen with eyes that carry no judgment, no expectation, just truth, that kind of looking erases everything except what matters. And what mattered in that moment was not the age. It was the fire, the breath, the ache, and the way, when eyes truly lock for real, the years fall away like water off a jacket in the rain. It wasn't expected. Not that night, not in that way. There had been no script, no careful arrangement of time or place. Just a storm outside, and a warmth growing between two people inside a room that had long been too quiet. And in the stillness, something unspoken came to life, slowly, honestly, like water rising around ankles before it's ever noticed. There was no pressure in the way he sat close, no assumption in the way his eyes stayed soft even when everything between them had begun to feel charged. The world outside was full of noise, thunder rolling, rain tapping the windows, but inside every sound felt sacred, every breath, every brush of skin. It started with the way he touched a strand of hair, just to move it from the face. Gentle, like it mattered, like the little things were important, and maybe that was the first time in years that touch didn't feel like an act but a language, a way of saying, I see you, I'm here, if you want me to be. The hand didn't move fast. It lingered, warm fingers against a cooler cheek. The contact was quiet, but inside, everything stirred. There had been so much silence in the body for so long that even this simple gesture felt like lightning. Not the kind that strikes, the kind that glows just beneath the skin. That reminds, the body didn't panic, it awakened. A kind of waking that isn't wild or urgent, but tender and full, like a room opening one curtain at a time. Like the first stretch after years of holding in, it wasn't planned. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. And when his hand traced the arm, it did so as if learning a path for the first time. Every inch mattered. Not rushed, not taken, just explored with wonder, with care, and something in the body softened. Something that hadn't trusted in a long while leaned forward instead of away. Fingers met skin that had forgotten how to ask for more. Skin that had been dressed and undressed, washed and worn, but never worshipped. Not like this, not with this kind of reverence. because this wasn't lust alone. This wasn't claiming, it was remembering. And honoring. The first kiss wasn't dramatic, just close, so close, lips brushing with the kind of pause that asked, is this okay? Do you want this too? And that question wasn't in words, but in the breath, in the trembling sigh that escaped without meaning to. The answer came not with speech, but with closeness. A turn of the face, a tilt of the chin, a meeting of mouths that didn't crash. They melted, and in that melting, everything opened, not wildly, slowly. The way doors open after years of being sealed, letting air move where there had only been dust. The body trembled, not from fear, not from surprise, but from being wanted, not just for what it could give, but for what it was. Warmth and softness and shape. Years didn't matter now. They fell away with each touch, each kiss, each breath. Clothes didn't come off quickly. They weren't discarded like burdens, but lifted like offerings. Every button was a choice. Every inch revealed was a moment of being seen and not judged. And when bare skin met bare skin, it wasn't exposure, it was communion. Two bodies speaking truths without needing a single word. The way he looked again, it was the eyes. They never left, never wandered. They stayed, even when touch became deeper. Even when sighs turned into gasps, there was presence in them, fullness, that rare kind of attention that tells the soul, you are safe. You are wanted, you are enough, and the soul responded. There was a point where everything went still again. In the middle of all that motion, there was stillness, not absence, presence, a moment where foreheads touched and everything felt suspended. A shared breath, a shared rhythm, a shared ache. It didn't feel like being taken. It felt like being kept. The body that had grown used to silence now sang in soft moans, whispered yeses, and fingers that gripped not from panic, but from surrender. And each movement that followed felt like a gift, one given with reverence, one received without shame. There were no lies in the dark, no pretending, no rehearsed lines, just warmth, real warmth, not the kind found in fire, but in the skin that presses into yours without needing to conquer you. And when the moment slowed, when breath returned to something steady, and the heart found its regular beat again, it wasn't emptiness that came next. It was fullness, a body no longer aching from hunger, but from gratitude. A soul that had been starving for connection finally fed. He held close, closer than expected, arms wrapped in a way that said, I'm not done holding you, and that somehow meant more than anything else. Because it wasn't about what just happened, it was about what lingered, what stayed, and in the quiet after, when fingers traced skin not to claim, but to remember, the body sighed again, not from release but from peace. Because to be wanted deeply, gently, and completely is not just about the body. It's about being seen, touched, and chosen all at once. The storm had passed sometime in the early morning, though the sky still wore the softness of rain-soaked clouds. Outside, everything glistened, rooftops, leaves, even the glass on the windows, washed clean and glimmering under a gray light that hinted at peace. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the hollow kind that comes from being alone too long, but the stillness that follows something real, something deep enough to leave an echo. The fireplace had gone out. The blankets had fallen partly off the couch. The floor held faint traces of clothes gathered in haste, then forgotten in the presence of something more urgent. And in the warm tangle of sheets, a body rested close. His breathing was steady, lips barely parted, brow soft. One arm still wrapped around, as if instinctually unwilling to let the night be only a moment. The storm had come and gone, but what it awakened hadn't. There had been a time when morning afters were filled with questions. Doubts, regret, not because of the act, but because of the emptiness that followed. The ache that came from being touched without being held, seen without being known, loved in action but not in intention. And after enough of those, the body learns to armor itself, to take part in closeness without ever really arriving. But this morning, this was different. There was no need to rush into clothes or explanations. No urgency to pretend nothing had happened, no guilt, no uncertainty, just warmth, a kind of warmth that had nothing to do with the blanket. It was the kind that settled deep inside, in the chest, in the stomach, in the spaces that usually stay quiet long after the rest of the world wakes up. He stirred slightly, shifting closer without opening his eyes, the way people do when sleep is sweet and the heart feels safe. And it hit again. What had really happened the night before wasn't just skin meeting skin. It wasn't just two lonely people finding relief in each other's bodies. It was something far deeper, something that couldn't be named easily, but was felt in every inch of space between their breathing. It was feeling, raw, unfiltered, unexpected feeling. It had started with conversation, drifted into laughter, settled into quiet pauses, and in those pauses everything bloomed. There had been no performance, no seduction, just presence, that full, unflinching presence that lets someone else know they're not alone anymore. And from that place, touch didn't feel like desire alone. It felt like a response to recognition. That was the difference. It wasn't about taking. It was about returning to a part of the self that had been buried beneath years of holding in, smiling through, and surviving quietly. A part that had almost been forgotten. A part that didn't want anything more than to be felt again. And he had done that, not with grand gestures or clever words, but with his eyes, his patience, his gentle hands that asked before they explored, his breath that aligned with hers like the wind against a window pane, his body that didn't press but welcomed. It wasn't just about closeness. It was about care, about love that wasn't declared, but shown in the way his fingers lingered long after the moment should have passed. In the way he whispered her name not to own it, but to honor it. In the way his lips didn't race but stayed, again and again, as if trying to memorize the shape of someone's soul through their skin. When their bodies had finally come together, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't wild, it was reverent, like prayer, like something sacred, every movement slow, every touch met with breath that answered without words, and somewhere in that rhythm, something inside broke open. Not in pain, in release, in the overwhelming realization of being filled, not just physically, but emotionally wholly. The tears had come later, not from sadness, but from the weight of what had just taken place. From the realization that years of numbness could dissolve in a single night of true presence. From the shock of how long it had been since feeling this full had even been possible. And he hadn't turned away from those tears. He'd held tighter, pressed his forehead against hers, kissed her cheeks slowly, tenderly, without questions, just stayed, and in that staying everything shifted, because love, when it's real, doesn't need to be explained. It just needs to be witnessed, and he witnessed it all, the longing, the vulnerability, the way the body trembled not from cold or pleasure alone, but from being finally seen. Now in the stillness of morning, with light pouring through half-open curtains and the scent of rain still lingering in the air, the truth of it all settled quietly in the chest. This wasn't just a night to remember. It was the beginning of something remembered, something ancient and soft and fierce, a kind of intimacy that floods the soul more than the skin, that leaves fingerprints on the heart, not just the body. And that's what made it love, because love isn't just in the heat of the moment. It's in the way someone stays after, in the way they hold you like they're not done listening to the shape of your breathing, in the way they let you be completely human and still look at you like you're a miracle. The power had come back, but the real current had never left. If this story stirred something deep inside you, don't let it go unnoticed. Love like this, slow, real, and soul-touching, is rare, but it lives here. So if you believe in the kind of love that returns after years of silence, the kind that holds on even when the lights come back on, then stay. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because the next story might be the one your heart's been waiting for.